You guys been enjoying the conference so far? Excellent. So, excuse me, my voice is a little croaky. I seem to have the cold that all of Auckland has at the moment. So I may cough a little. Sorry about that. Anyway, so inside WPC Connect, building an engaging service-driven SharePoint site. Does anyone know what WPC Connect is? Yeah, Brian, you know. So just to give you guys a little bit of background, the Worldwide Partner Conference from Microsoft. It's their largest conference every year. My team and I had the privilege and slightly daunting task of building the attendee portal for that conference, which has around 19,000 attendees. So it was quite a little daunting, a lot of fun. So during this session, we're going to give you a little bit of a sneak peek into some of the techniques we used inside there, and why you might actually care. Because really, what we did, you're probably never going to do what we did, but there's a whole bunch of the stuff that we did that you probably do care about. The whys, and how does it matter to you? So our agenda today, why do we care about services? What are they? Do these things actually matter to us as developers, architects, people planning sites? We're going to talk a little bit about what drives user engagement, because I think that to have a successful site, you have to have engaged users. What do you get from SharePoint? What does it give you? Why are we even using SharePoint? Some of the ways that you might go about leveraging services throughout your journey down this path. We'll give you a demo of the site, and I'll talk you through what's going on inside there. And then we'll have a little bit of a wrap-up. So, that's me. I'm Gavin. Hi. I'm a solution architect at a company called Intergen. We're a services company here in New Zealand, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Seattle, Sydney, Perth, Melbourne. There's my contact details is there, my blog site, which I update infrequently, but I try and make the posts interesting at least. I'm a code junkie. I'm a developer through and through, and sometimes I have to rein myself in and say, no, don't write code. There are other ways to do this. I'm a skier. I'm stoked that it's cold at the moment because there's been lots of snow. Okay. Why are we going to bother with services? Actually, first and foremost, services. I'm actually not just talking about web services here. I'm talking about software as a service, infrastructure as a service, cloud-based services, services you've written yourself. There's a whole range of things that are falling under that umbrella of services. Essentially, what I'm talking about is really how you can consume information and, again, services. This word is so useful. Actions that other providers might provide for you, data they can provide for you, outcomes they can provide for you. So, what's the one thing as a developer in Office 365 that you can't do, that you could do with an on-premise server? This question's actually really important because I don't know if you've caught it. Microsoft have really betting on this cloud thing. And if we're in the Microsoft ecosystem, we should be thinking about how that impacts us. How can we set our customers up to go there? How can we be going there? So, Office 365, what's the one thing you can't do as a developer that you could do with an on-premise solution? Trusted solution. Yep. Your code can't run on that box. It's just not possible. They don't allow it. with the exception of a sandbox solution, but code inside those is deprecated, so don't do that, please. So what you can do, though, is write JavaScript and put that into your sites, because that runs on the browser. It doesn't run on their servers. Or you could use Silverlight if you want to use another dead technology. But I would suggest JavaScript is a good option. Or you could run code on other servers and use an iframe. Or maybe an app. There's lots of reasons why we want to think about using services as opposed to full trust solutions. Because even if we're on premise and we start building this way, we're setting ourselves up for an easier transition to the future, to moving into a cloud, be it private, public, Office 365, what have you. This quote: to create a family of devices and services for individuals and businesses that empower people around the globe, at home, at work, on the go, for the activities they value most. Steve Ballmer wrote that into the shareholder letter a couple of years ago. Now, Steve was on the way out the door at that point, but he was signaling right at that point, Microsoft are going through a big change. The bet here is the cloud. Satya Nadella, March this year. Mobile first, cloud first world. We've got to be thinking about cloud. It's coming into SharePoint. It's been coming for a while. If we don't start thinking about how can we ensure that our transition paths up to a cloud-delivered model of content and services, if we don't think about that, then we're going to be setting ourselves up for a really hard time in a year or two. So, a service is a self-contained unit of functionality such as retrieving an online bank statement. Wikipedia tells us this. Service-oriented architectures aren't new. They've been kicking around since the 90s. The idea of building up a set of addressable network calls, as I like to call them. So a piece of reusable functionality that you can address on a network. I'm saying network here because it doesn't have to be internet addressable. You might want to write a service in-house that exposes some line of business data off a legacy system and not have it internet addressable, but just have it addressable securely within your network. That way, you've got that old Oracle database that's got, financial data from the 90s that you need to report on, or maybe it's got HR information that you need to expose out to another system. Writing a service over top of that instead of just going direct to the database is a really good way to start thinking about things. The days of wiring up an ADO.NET connection to the database and going straight there for all your answers, they're gone. Because once you've done that, cool, that application uses that data. What about in 6 months' time where the CEO goes, hey, I want you to build me an app for my iPhone so I can start reading these reports when I'm out and about. Oh, well, we can't reuse that effort we just put in. So I would encourage you to start thinking about your data access as, instead of going straight to databases from your applications, putting a service layer in between, securing it appropriately, and that's really quite achievable today. That way you're getting reuse straight away with what you're doing. So I've talked about, this idea of putting a service over top of data. Data services aren't new. There's plenty of examples of them out in the wild on the internet that you probably don't even think about. How many of you use Feedly or Google Reader or Yeah, RSS. That's just another data source that you can wire up to. Internet addressable, reusable functionality. There's lots of these data services that are actually really valuable and can provide quite rich feeds of information. So you don't have to build everything yourself. You can look out on the public internet and there might be information that you want to start consuming as a service right now. The other thing to think about is, what other services could we be using? Could we, instead of having our own tin in our own data center, start using Amazon Web Services to host our infrastructure? Or maybe Azure and IaaS. So spin up our own virtual machines in a public cloud and address them directly there, secured appropriately. It's another form of service that's going to help you. There's some other really cool services out there that you can plug into, software as a service services. Has anyone heard of Raygun.io? It's an amazing little piece of software that was developed by some guys called Mindscape down in Wellington. What it allows you as a developer to do is wire in a line of code so that when you get an exception in your code, it will actually push the details of that exception to their site, to their piece of software as a service, and then that exception can be emailed out to you as a consumer. So you can be sitting at home, it's, Tuesday evening, and bing, email. Something's gone horribly, horribly wrong in the production environment for one of my customers, and I know about it now. Instead of the scenario where something went wrong and nobody knew because the tree fell in the woods and there was no one there to see it. Services they're taking over the world, right? Everything as a service right now. Infrastructure, software. There are other things that I am forgetting here. Anyway. Whoop. No, that's not the right button. That one. So, what I'd like to think about is, we've talked about services. How can we use these for engagement? What is it that makes users come to your site and connect with it? What makes a user come to your website? How do you measure user engagement? Is there any form of measurement that you would use? Things like, how long does the user spend on the site? What's your bounce rate? So how many people come into the site and they go, don't like this, out of here, before clicking onto a second page? How many pages do your users view during the course of that visit? Do they go 2 pages deep and that's it? Do they go 3 pages deep but happen to spend 10 or 15 minutes on your site? If someone's spending double digits of minutes on your site in a visit, that's a measure of a user who's actually really quite interested in what they're finding here. Otherwise, they would have left. Let's face it, people today have a very short attention span, particularly on the internet. So if you've got people who are really engaged and connected with your site, you're going to have long visits. Is anyone realizing another service that you could be using here? Webtrends, Google Analytics, visitor tracking. That short little block of code that Google give you to drop Google Analytics into your page. Yeah, that's yet another service that we can help to measure what's going on our site and work out, have we got engaged users? What else makes our site awesome? So if you're writing a SharePoint site, or using SharePoint to deliver your site, and you need to display some new content in there. We think about doing things in the 2007 way. We build a web part. And in the page load event of the web part, we make some calls out to load some data and process it and transform it, and then render it into the page. Now, what's the effect of that on our page load times? By doing that as part of the server-side page load code, it means that the page load time for our users can go right through the roof because of that web part we've just dropped into the page. So what about things like asynchronous loading of data? That way, the page pops up to the user really fast. Doesn't give them everything that they're after right immediately, but at least they've got the page back fast and they're not going to abandon straight away. It gives you more time to go off and fetch some data in the background and start streaming it back to them. So JavaScript is really good here for going, hey, the page is loaded. I'm ready to do stuff. Hey, service out there, can I have some data, please? If you're going to use techniques like this, things like little spinners for loading, really good key to give your users that, hey, things are going on. We're actually still working for you here. We might be taking a bit of time to load this, but we're interested in you. So other things that drive user engagement and make your sites awesome. You know, relevant information. Is the stuff actually what I care about? Is it what I care about? By making the information that's presented to the user personal. So tailoring the information displayed based upon the user profile of that person. You know, content is king, as they would say in, you know, the media. If you haven't got good content, people are just going to leave. And if you've got content that's changing, people are going to keep coming back to get new content. The site does need to be easy to use. You know, and easy to use doesn't necessarily just mean easy to use on my desktop. It also means, hey, this should possibly be a good experience for me, probably be a good experience for me on my smartphone. Because let's face it, today that people are consuming your information everywhere. The CEO on the plane flying across America using in-flight wireless, that's a real thing. And I've alluded to this, quick to load. Yeah, sure, take your time to load some extra data in behind, but get the page back to them real quick. Make it snappy. Oh, done it again. So, why would we use SharePoint for any of this? What services does SharePoint give us? Anybody? What does SharePoint give me? I'm using SharePoint. REST? Okay, that's a protocol. So what? Data, yeah. So data storage, data retrieval. Yep. Search. And I'd actually encourage you to start thinking of search as just another data access method. It's often going to be faster than the classic query. You get access controls. You know, you can secure stuff so that the people who are supposed to see it can see it, and the other people can't. These are actually really important things when you're building a site that you have to think about, oh, these people get to see this information, and these people get to see this information. Just making it display nicely, that's good. But if people can subvert that and walk straight to the content, if they know it's there, that's no good if it's sensitive information. Managed metadata is a really interesting service that's provided by SharePoint. You know, version 1 was a little rough around the edges. Version 2 is pretty good. We even get to use it for navigation these days. All these things are exposed to us as a mix of RESTful services. Some of them are still .asmx services. And other ones like managed metadata, there's actually JSON and CSOM APIs for. In fact, most of these have both managed client-side code options and JavaScript options, as well as the RESTful endpoints. So you do get to choose your own poison to an extent. In some circumstances, it's chosen for you, but whatever works for you best as a developer. If you've got a team of devs who are PHP developers, they're not really going to be so interested in trying to use the managed code options or the SharePoint specific JavaScript options, but those RESTful services, they probably understand those perfectly. So, service-driven experiences in your site. How can you make use of services within SharePoint these days? Web parts. Still perfectly valid if you're in 2007 or maybe 2010. But as I said, probably want to steer away from using these guys anymore. It's an old school way of doing things. It's valid, but possibly not the best option. So, who's familiar with the app model? Yeah, a couple of hands. Cool. So, SharePoint hosted apps give you the ability to deploy a collection of CSS, HTML, JavaScript into a protected SharePoint site on demand by the user who wishes to install it. That can do whatever you want it to, because you're a JavaScript developer and the world's your oyster. Now, the problem with SharePoint hosted apps is one of the things I've just told you. You can only deploy file-based elements like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So now imagine the scenario where you have a service that you need to consume data out of, that you want to secure access to, or maybe the way that it secures access to itself is by use of an API key, so that you can only access your data and not the other tenants on that service. And you're using this on a public-facing site. Can anyone guess what the problem with that might be? If you're in pure JavaScript land, you have to put that API key somewhere in your JavaScript code. So if you get a malicious user come along, we'll right-click, view source, start digging through the JavaScript. Oh, that's minified, that's ugly. Well, we'll download that file and we'll put it through a beautifier. Oh, what's this API key here? Guess what? Congratulations. You've just been hacked because you gave them the keys to the castle. They are now able to do any action against that endpoint that they can discover. And if it's a publicly available API, they've got full access to your data. So sometimes a SharePoint hosted app is a very bad idea. The provider hosted app actually allows us to keep a little bit more control here. So provider hosted apps deploy very little into SharePoint. In fact, all of the smarts of your provider hosted app go onto whatever technology platform on another server of your choosing. So in the classic .NET world, we're going to spin up an Azure website, probably going to use ASP.NET MVC with some C#, and we can put our own service there to act as a proxy out between the public API that we were previously using in our SharePoint hosted app, keep the API key in web.config over on that ASP.NET MVC site, so that that end user who's consuming your site can never ever see that key. And hey, we've now got a mechanism that allows us to expose these services out to the site where we need them, but in such a way that you're not giving away the keys to the castle. Now, personally, I love the provider-hosted app model. It means that we're able to use quite elegant solutions like ASP.NET MVC. But if you choose to, you can be a Ruby on Rails developer and build a provider-hosted app where all your logic's written in Rails or whatever language you choose, and then it's exposed to SharePoint as just another iframe with a little bit of authentication in it. App parts. App parts are just an iframe. It's just an iframe that wraps up something that's sitting out there on your provider-hosted app and providing that functionality back in. Now, these last three options, if you're in SharePoint 2010 or 2007, none of them are an option. The app model is a SharePoint 2013 innovation, but it doesn't stop you from thinking about these things and using techniques like code as content. So, how many of you have written some JavaScript, saved it in a text file, uploaded it into a document library, and then used the content editor web part to put that into a page? Everybody. Now, all of the techniques that I'm talking about today, pretty much you can use this approach. If you've got a web service sitting over here and you need to make calls to it, the easiest way to do this is write the JavaScript, stick it in a text file, link it in using the script editor if you're in 2013, or the content editor web parts. Now, the Jquery Ajax call is your friend here. It's the wrapper that will let you make remote calls out to web services. I would highly encourage you to write wrappers over top of that so that your code isn't littered with these $Ajax calls everywhere. You're just calling your own custom wrappers. So I've spent a little bit of time talking about how you might do things and why you might do things. But I think it makes a lot more sense if you actually see the website in action. Now, I'm not going to show you guys any code today. Sorry, I told you I was a code junkie, but this is, for a first time, I'm going IDE free. Now, I need to duplicate that. The first thing I want to show you isn't the site that we've built. I mentioned raygun.io earlier. This is raygun.io's site. At a glance, I can see that back in May, we had a whole lot of exceptions and horrible problems. And things have been really stable for quite some time, until we had a few blips a few days ago. You can see what types of exceptions have been thrown, get information about what went wrong. Hey, we had problems parsing JSON 2 days ago. Drill in onto the exceptions and really get a very clear understanding of the exception that was thrown. And you haven't even had to go and remote into the web server and start trawling through the ULS logs here, because you've made use of a service that's on the internet that can notify you straight away when something went wrong. So, highly encourage you to start looking at this if you're writing custom code. Subscription-based service with a lot of tiers to it. But enough of that one. So, WPC Connect. First thing we see is the sign-in page. Now, I'm going to click sign in. Guess what? We're going to use the Live ID service to sign in. Because I don't want to have to be concerned about managing people's passwords and usernames. I don't want that risk. I'll let Microsoft do it because they're really good at it. We've actually got a custom STS, or security token service, sitting between Live ID and our site, which is actually mining some extra data out of the Live ID system to provide us richer claims-based authentication. So it actually provides us things like email, first name, last name, which is not natively addressable through the claims-based auth system that Live exposes. Now, you can see when I sign in here, immediately, this site's personalized to me. There I am. There's even a photo of me. Nice and friendly, right? The navigation here is targeted to me as a user. During login, this site we actually did build using an on-premises build of SharePoint in the cloud. So we're using Azure IaaS and classic SharePoint server, as you all know and love it. And we're using what's called claims augmentation to make a call out to the registration system. So people register to attend the conference. We make as the login actions are happening, we make a call out to the registration system to see, hey, Gavin, you know about Gavin. Is he going to the conference? Is he a registered attendee? We'll add that claim to the token. And because I have that claim in my token, I get to see additional things in the navigation that the default public user wouldn't. Specifically, the sessions and my WPC schedule options here. Now, that's actually using security trimming. So even if you knew they existed, but you weren't attending, you couldn't get to those pages. You'd just get an access denied message. We've got this profile completion box over here on the right. I hope none of you get motion sickness because we will be diving in and out using Zoom it here. Now, this profile completion box, we use this to drive people to give us information about them. We try and tailor the site based upon your preferences and the things you're interested in and your user profile. So if you don't fill out your user profile, we can't tailor things as well. So by putting this little box here that makes a call down to the user profile system, looks at what properties you've populated, and we've just assigned a weighting to each property that we want people to fill out, and give them a little score out of 100. Hey, I didn't fill in my Facebook page, but otherwise it would just show, hey, welcome to me. We found this a really good way to actually drive people to fill out their profiles. Unfortunately, because I've logged in and been through this process a few times before, you didn't get to see our profile wizard that pops up as a first run experience to help, again, just all those things to try and get that user information so we can help tailor the site to you as a user. Because if the site's more if the site presents information that's more relevant to you, you're going to be more engaged with it. You're going to stick with the site more, use it more. So you can see here we've got some social feeds, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. We've got the classic SharePoint social stream or news feed in the center. And then we've got this recommended section here. So we're recommending people who you might want to meet with or follow within this site. Now, you could do this using SharePoint people search and similar people. In our case, we were using a remote API provided by one of the other vendors involved in this project, where they have a bunch of custom logic to look at the user profiles of these people and decide who are most similar to you. We had to then pick that data up and stitch it together with some user profile information so we can show the appropriate photos, and then stream it back out to the users. There's this My Connect calendar thing here. So I can see, hey, I haven't had any new meeting requests, but if I did, they'd be right there front and center telling me, hey, someone's actually interested in connecting with me at the event. Shows me at a glance how many meetings I've got scheduled. Again, this is making a call out to the remote endpoint that is provided by the session management software that runs, again, in the cloud on Microsoft Azure websites, but not managed by us. Now, one of the things that this site provides is a number of SharePoint communities for discussions about the event or about within your local area. So the APAC, the Australian attendees had their own community to discuss what they were doing and their goings on. Now, what we've done is look at your user profile information, some key values, do a search against all the discussions within the site, and promote the results within those discussions that match against values within your user profile using XRank. So this allows us to dynamically reorder a search, and that's all available as a RESTful API. Very powerful techniques. You know, the fact that search has been exposed as a RESTful API is an amazingly powerful tool. And then at the bottom, we have this little My Groups link. So you can be alerted to how many updates are within the groups or communities in the site that you're actively engaged with over the last 24 hours. Hasn't been anything because the conference was last week, so activity's died off quite a bit since then. Now, if I'm interested in Eli, I can click on the classic SharePoint behavior. You know, click on the username, it'll take me off to their user profile. Now you can see a couple of extra buttons in here over and above the default SharePoint follow action. I'm able to both request a meeting with Eli and send him a message. Again, these are APIs that are provided external to SharePoint. Writing a peer-to-peer messaging system in SharePoint doesn't really seem like a great idea to me. But by leveraging an external API, I can allow Brian to send me a message, and we can have a chat about what we're going to be doing at WPC and never expose our email addresses to each other. So to, stop spammers from harvesting email addresses, because that would be a terrible thing. And, if we, after having a few discussions, we decide that, hey, it would probably be beneficial to sit down and have a chat about a business opportunity, we can set up meetings. So, if I click on Request a Meeting, it's going to take me into the meeting scheduler part of this system, which allows us to set up meetings in the site between attendees who are registered to go. So, I'll just scroll down here. hey, we've only got Eli here because he's the person I chose to try and invite for a meeting. I'm going to invite him. But there's some other people I'd like to invite to this meeting as well. Now, I know that my friend Jen is going. It might be easier if I was to type her full name, but by typing her first name here, I'm actually able to show you, hey, we've just got a people search web part here embedded in a search web part embedded in the page here. That's wired up to use the the tailored people result source. So it's not the default SharePoint result source. We're looking for people who are registered to attend who have public profiles and are fully opted in to the meetings. We have classic SharePoint refinement options based on these people's user profiles. You know, I think this meeting's going to be very important, so I need to find someone who's, you know, a CEO to come along. These kind of activities, really useful if you're going to this conference for the specific purpose of trying to drum up more business or make connections with other partners in your area. I'm able to click on invite here, and we'll see that the person I've invited is populated into the list of attendees. I'll remove them, dynamically adds calls back to there and updates that. So all that behavior is done using custom display templates with our search results. So nothing that is running on the server side there that's making API calls within the page to add and remove people. You'll see that there's some green status bars down the side. We actually have API calls going out to the system that tracks all the bookings for people to see if people have meetings which they have accepted at that time to show if they're busy, free, or hey, maybe they've been invited to a meeting that they haven't accepted yet, they'll be tentative. We're able to do a bunch of stuff about setting up meetings and invite other people. So we can actually make the most out of this relatively expensive trip to DC to build as many business connections as possible. Now, the other reason that people go to this conference is actually to go along to these sessions to hear these great Microsoft speakers and see what's coming in the next year. So the sessions section of the site, really cool. We've got a remote API that provides all the information about all the sessions throughout the entire conference. And what we're doing here is simply picking that up, streaming it back out to the end, to the client. Now we've got the data, we can slice and dice this using these filters within the page. So I've got some free time on Tuesday afternoon. So you can see as I click, hey, the number of sessions just cut down quite a bit. And you know what? I think I've really only got time from 12:30 to 1. Oh, there's a session here by Christian Buckley on using Yammer. That sounds kind of interesting. So I'm able to add that to my schedule straight off the bat. Makes a call out to our scheduling software API. Saves that to my schedule. That's at Tuesday at 2:30. I'm just going to open this in a new tab, open my WPC schedule, see what I've got on for my trip out to DC. Take a little bit of time to go and fetch all the data from that remote endpoint. Now, because the conference is over, we've actually scrolled to the end of the window that we're showing this calendar for. It's a really cool calendar control called the Jquery full calendar, if you're looking for this sort of tool. So as we scroll back through the days, we can see, hey, there's that session with Christian that I was quite interested in going to. that gives me all the details within my calendar here. I'm able to filter my calendar dynamically in the page without making any remote calls here. All that data is just held within the browser so I can quickly filter. I have a number of meetings on my schedule. So I have a happy hour meeting in the social hub with Melissa Porter. I can see who else is going. I can see the status of whether they've accepted or not. Now, bear in mind, none of this data is held in SharePoint. It's all held in a SQL Azure database behind a RESTful API maintained by another vendor. All we needed to do was build the web front end and wire up those RESTful calls. I say all. It takes a bit of work, but it's a whole lot easier than writing that scheduling software in the back end. By using services that are available on the internet, you're able to quickly compose up a site that does a lot more than you'd be able to do if you were building the whole thing by yourself from scratch in the first place. Which I guess is kind of the point of services. We're able to reuse functionality that we've written ourselves, that other people have written, to assemble a site. So, before I mentioned RSS, there's a dedicated content team for WPC. It's a pretty big job. Now, they maintain a site called digitalwpc.com, and they didn't want to have to double enter any of that data. So, this latest news section down the left-hand side here in our content page, none of that data actually lives in our SharePoint site. It lives over on Digital. All we're doing is consuming their RSS feed and presenting it out to our users here. It allows us to author content in one place, but echo it out in many places. These videos that we've got here, these recent videos, I'm just going to click the More button to take you to the video gallery. Again, none of this data is stored in SharePoint. It's stored on another server, on another system provided by another vendor. All we're doing is calling their services to get their data back, provide it to the user in the most sensible way possible. So, where is WPC? The video will load. Now, we've got a video player in pane here. Guess what? It's not the video pane is not served out of SharePoint. It's an iframe on a dedicated page sitting elsewhere, and the video file is sitting on a CDN elsewhere. So we've got some really heavy, rich media assets that you could store in a SharePoint library, but that would be kind of wasteful. By putting it elsewhere, you're able to optimize your storage and make sensible use of your resources. Because WPC it's really about connecting people, we wanted to make sure that anybody who's within the system can find anybody else who chooses to be found. Every user can go uncheck a box in their user profile and say, nope, don't want to be found, make me private, and they won't appear in any search results. So what we're doing is this is just a SharePoint people results search page that has had the result source slightly tailored. So with this site, not much of the content that the end users are consuming actually lives within SharePoint. Most of the content that lives within SharePoint here is actually user profile information. Most of the data that you're really interested in lives on totally separate systems. Now, the nice thing here is that if you're going to use these techniques, you can put some really heavy lifting in behind those services, and they can run on a separate box. And the performance implications there don't affect your SharePoint server. This is why Microsoft are really pushing us to avoid using full trust solutions, because when we use full trust solutions that run in the context of W3WP on your SharePoint server, you can take that bad boy down pretty easily. So that's a quick tour of the WPC Connect site. So I'm going to switch back to the presentation. And so, look at that. Got it. So, services are becoming a cornerstone of internet computing. Services, if you build services, they allow you to reuse your investment in that effort. So if you build a service to expose some data on your intranet and you have a need 6 months, 12 months down the road to consume that data in another application, be it a mobile device application or another website that you guys need to build, services let you reuse your investment here, or your investment in software as a service. SharePoint does give you a great start for 10. There's a whole bunch of services baked into the product. Search, access control, workflow. So you should start looking at how you can use services and leverage them to create these compelling user experiences. How can you use a service within your SharePoint site to present information that's personalized to your users so they're interested and engaged with what you're doing? Learn JavaScript or get your devs to learn. This JavaScript is very quickly becoming the duct tape and super glue of the internet. So it's a very useful skill to have right now. So embrace services to compose engaging user experiences. If you take nothing else away, hey, Raygun.io is a great back-end service that's going to be useful for you down the track no matter what you're doing. So, questions? Okay. Hey, thanks very much, guys. If you've got any questions at all, just come up, have a chat. Cool.